everyone, welcome back. So today on our channel, we have a special guest. Erin is here in Scottsdale, and she runs a PCOS health coaching business. So today's episode, we are going to be diving into all things polycystic ovary syndrome. This is a really common concern for women, and I think a medical topic that doesn't get a lot of justice done to it in terms of the medical treatments and the options available for women. And I think that there are a lot of options available in this arena that there are a lot of women that have no idea that it even exists. So I'm super excited to have Erin on today. Hi, Erin.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I want to dive right in, but before we do, for our viewers, just a quick reminder, our channel is for all things women's health. So you can expect all things health, hormones, aesthetics to be coming your way. And if you are enjoying the content that we're putting out, make sure that you like and subscribe and hit the notification bell below so that you can know when our content comes out. So Erin, to dive in, I want to just kind of give our viewers a little bit of an idea of your story, because PCOS health coaching wasn't always something that you wanted to do. Is that correct?
Oh, definitely not. I never thought I would be doing this.
So our journey plan for us, and we don't know what it is.
I know. So I really started my PCOS journey after coming off of hormonal birth control, which I was on for 12 years. I started at the age of 11, right after my first period. And I started experiencing, actually right after high school, about 18, that I was experiencing a little bit of hirsutism. I gained a ton of weight, kind of seemingly overnight. Beyond that, I didn't have too many other symptoms, but of course I was super concerned about this chin hair that was growing out of my face. I was like, what the heck is happening? So I saw a lot of different doctors. I saw probably upwards of 15, 20 different doctors within maybe a 3 or 4 year span. And then I ended up moving to Arizona from Idaho. And I'm sitting in my car one day and I just have this kind of like epiphany. I'm like, it could be my birth control, because I knew that it was hormonal. I just didn't know how it all connected. So I did my own research. I still tried to reach out to doctors, didn't get a whole lot of support, ended up coming off of hormonal birth control. And after that, I realized just through my own self-research that I had PCOS. So I stayed off of hormonal birth control for a while. It took me about a year, maybe a year and 4 months-ish, before I saw a doctor to get like an official diagnosis, but I had already been doing a lot to help manage my PCOS naturally by that point. So I really just needed, kind of to dot that final I. Yeah. And I did. I was officially diagnosed, and from there on out, I had already been working on a health coaching certification to help women. I was so disappointed with the lack of resource, so disappointed that I couldn't get a doctor to help me, a conventional med doctor to help me. It really was just a, really emotional journey. And I just knew that my part in all of this was to help other people have less of a harsh journey as they're transitioning, finding out they have PCOS. Like, what the heck do I do now? Like, that's where I want to help people. And here I am.
I think that's awesome. I think that's so important. A lot of PCOS is one of those really hard diagnoses. So it's a hard diagnosis for a couple reasons. Getting diagnosed with PCOS is actually quite easy. It's a diagnosis it's a 3 criteria diagnosis, which a lot of people don't know. So it's basically signs of hirsutism, which is what you mentioned, and that can be subjective or found on labs. Basically what this means is signs of high testosterone. And so in women, it shows up like acne, oily skin, and hair growth. And then it is follicles on the ovaries. So oftentimes this is done with a pelvic ultrasound, usually transvaginal, and there's a certain number of follicles on the ovaries that are normal. And then in PCOS women, there's often more follicles found on the ovaries because they're having anovulatory cycles, which basically means that they cycle, usually long cycles, which is criteria number 3. But their cycles are anovulatory, meaning that they never ovulate. So it causes a buildup of follicles in the ovary. And then diagnosis Number 3 is long cycles. And a long cycle is actually considered to be anything over like 35 days. And so that's where we start with women. But a lot of so that's like, okay, you just have PCOS. We do things like check fasting insulin and talk about weight and its correlation to testosterone, but we pay a little bit less attention, I think, to the mental side of polycystic ovary syndrome, because it is a common cause of infertility in women, and it's a scary diagnosis to get. So it's scary to go through on your own. And I feel like conventionally it's interesting because you mentioned your birth control, and that is one of the common treatments, which I totally put in quotations, that's given to women, because a lot of women don't realize when they're on birth control, they're not having a cycle. They're having what's called a withdrawal bleed, which is basically like a fake bleed. When you remove a progestin, you'll bleed. If you are at least building up enough of a uterine lining, you will bleed with a progestin, but it's actually a fake bleed. So it's interesting because a lot of women don't realize, like, they're given that as a treatment option thinking, okay, this is fixing my symptoms, but it's not actually fixing the problem.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I've done a lot of research on birth control and how it impacts our bodies. And it really is disappointing to me as now a health coach and somebody who manages my PCOS 100% naturally, that it's, kind of the Band-Aid that we slap on PCOS and, kind of send you off on your way. And we're really just not educated as, women, as teenagers who are menstruating, about our body. So we have no idea that it's not a real period, and we think everything's hunky-dory and just kind of move on.
Absolutely. And the amount of women that have your story where they go on birth control at like 11, 13 for heavy periods, they're not sexually active, and nobody ever communicates with them the changes that happen on a hormonal level. Because birth control will not only, and you and I have had this conversation, like, birth control will not only change your testosterone and the way that your body responds to testosterone, but it will change things like thyroid and cortisol. And nobody ever communicates this to women. And so we're just kind of like, okay, this is a great treatment option, until all of a sudden we have symptoms, and then it becomes a little bit harder to kind of back down from that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you talk a lot about managing your PCOS naturally. Can you give me an idea of what that looks like? Or if somebody's struggling with PCOS, where you would recommend they start?
Yeah. So the starting point is a little different for everybody. It really is just based on their own journey. So I like to really, when I sit down with somebody who's considering, diving into health coaching with me, or who really is just, newly diagnosed, kind of overwhelmed, I really like to dive into their story and see how they're feeling around, food and exercise. So the way that I naturally manage my own PCOS is with a heavy emphasis on food and exercise, and stress management. Those are like the 3 biggies for me. And then I still, because this is such a long process, I still am working on like eliminating endocrine disrupting like products. So things like skincare, beauty care, hair care, the food storage that you use, the water you drink. I mean, it's kind of like an everything, right?
It's that's totally overwhelming. It's so important, but totally overwhelming. Yes.
It totally can be. So I am still working through that process on my own. But sometimes when I sit down with somebody who's feeling super overwhelmed, sometimes that feels like the least overwhelming thing. So we start there sometimes.
Okay.
And for other people, usually diet is like such a huge emphasis. But for a lot of people, especially PCOS women who have maybe struggled with weight and body image issues, self-confidence, that seems like that's where they want to start, but they're not ready for it emotionally or mentally. So we start somewhere else.
That makes a lot of sense. I have a lot of women in my office who come in, and when it comes to weight changes, there tends to be a lot of like focus and blame put on the patient. And oftentimes these patients have done everything that they know how to do. And it's not necessarily that they aren't trying or that they're not doing the quote unquote right thing. They just don't have the resources, or they don't have the understanding from a metabolic picture to be able to actually change that. So I think that's so important. We actually did a video on reverse dieting with somebody that I frequently work with in my patients, and she's amazing. So if people are struggling with metabolism, if there's any women that are struggling with metabolism watching that, that would be a good video to go and kind of dive into. So for you, so Erin and I actually met because we use the same trainer, and we both adore her, and we're going to be doing some videos with Ashley in the near future on training for women. But exercise has been a huge part of your journey. Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, so I actually started training with Ashley a little over 2 years ago now. And exercise has always been one of those things that like I just never thought that I would do as a person. Like, I grew up as kind of, once I started showing PCOS symptoms, I gained like a ton of weight, but I had always felt like I was kind of like on the chunkier side. Like I kind of wrote the story for myself that I was just kind of naturally lazy, not athletic. I wasn't involved in any sports really as a kid. Like I didn't do a whole lot. And that kind of, as an adult, turned into uncomfortable in the gym, uncomfortable with how I look while I'm exercising, uncomfortable with like wrapping my head around how to exercise. But I had a moment in my PCOS journey where I read a statistic saying that for every 10% increase in muscle mass, there's an 11% correlating increase in insulin sensitivity. And
Wow.
that was a big, big moment for me. So exercise is really where I started making change for my PCOS, like in a really big way, because I thought that if I could get comfortable in the gym and start strength training, that my muscle mass would increase and it would help my insulin sensitivity and kind of help my symptoms calm down to a point where I felt mentally and emotionally able to make other lifestyle change. Because when you're in the midst of PCOS, you just feel so overwhelmed. You have no energy, you have no libido, you're having all of these symptoms, you're so overwhelmed with all the information, you don't know where to start, and it just turns into this cyclical kind of depression and anxiety like cycle that you go through, and you can't figure out how to get out of it. So I started with exercise. I actually went and met Ashley. She found me on Instagram actually through my PCOS health coaching account, and she commented on something. And I ended up connecting with her. So I had like a consult with her, but at the time I could not afford her coaching fees, her training fees. So I actually went to my bosses, who I still work for, my 9 to 5. I work for a business brokerage firm in Scottsdale. And I pitched them the idea that if they stopped paying for my health insurance, which was about $400 a month, that they could in turn write me a check for $400 and kind of help me train with Ashley. So, and still to this day, they pay for those coaching fees. I work out with Ashley twice a month and they cover those fees. And then anything additional on top of that, if I were to add more days or whatever, I cover that myself. But that's how I started working with her. And like I said, it's been over 2 years now. And it's been hands down the best thing I've ever done for my PCOS, for my confidence, my self-esteem, just overall feeling good energetically in my body. It's been life-changing.
So there's so many things that you just said that I think are amazing. So first of all, I love that you figured out a way to do it, because I think that sometimes people put a lot of excuses in their way, right? Well, I can't afford it and I can't do whatever it is, right? And I think it's important to kind of look outside the box and say, okay, how can I make this work? Because it's a completely different mindset. And the other thing that I love is that you talked about muscle mass and strength training. So I think as women, and this is definitely, society is shifting, which is something I'm really excited about. But in the last couple of years, we've shifted from that, hey, we need to be a cardio bunny, spend several hours a day on our treadmill, and we've shifted over to strength training, which I think is really, really important. The research on strength training in women is fantastic for overall longevity and health. We know that women, as we age, are very, very high risk for something called sarcopenia, which is basically muscle loss. And the way that you stop having sarcopenia is by strength training, especially at a younger age. And then we know that for things like insulin resistance and metabolism, your metabolic balance is changed dramatically by strength training and the addition of muscle, even more than cardio. And there's something called the afterburn, right? When you exercise, and your afterburn for strength training is way longer than a cardio session. And so I think that starting with strength training is really, really important. And part of that, I think, is finding a good trainer. Because I know as a woman, I don't know if you felt like this, but when I first started training, I got a little bit nervous, that you're not going to look the way that you want to look. A lot of the reason why you work out is so that you can get to an end point, right? And I want an endpoint that is a very female figure. And I think that there's certain exercises that you can do to get a female figure versus, being a little bit more boxy. And Ashley's been amazing at that. So you guys can watch out for future videos because she's going to go over all of the exercises that she thinks are really great for women, exercises that she thinks women should probably do a little bit less of. And so that way people can still strength train and not feel like they're going in the wrong direction. What other lifestyle changes are you working through with your patients, or what are you seeing be like the most effective for them?
So diet is obviously a huge portion of managing PCOS, and it can be a little tricky. It's unique for everybody. So there's a lot of kind of food experimentation that we go through with trying to figure out appropriate carb tolerances for people, which is huge for the insulin resistance community, and really kind of playing with macros. And I think that it changes throughout a PCOS journey because in the beginning, like I said, you're exhausted, you're overwhelmed, and you're kind of just trying to make it through the day. So we focus a lot on making sure that all of their macros are covered so that they're getting that energy. We focus a lot on eliminating endocrine disruptors from their products. And then a lot of focus is on stress eliminating techniques or how to manage your stress. So those are the big ones. I do briefly talk about supplements, but obviously that is not my area. I always refer them out to a doctor for that. But that's also kind of the magic pill syndrome where it's like, oh, I'll just take a supplement and it'll be better. Like, yes, it doesn't work that way.
Doesn't work that way. No, it doesn't work that way. When it comes to insulin resistance, I mean, there are certain key nutrients that are really important for insulin sensitivity and your ability to use insulin. So things like chromium. Chromium is really necessary to cellular level to be able to utilize insulin effectively. And so I think the micronutrition is really important, but the macronutrition is even more important. And so I'm super glad that you mentioned macros because I think that carb tolerance, they're definitely in polycystic ovary syndrome. There are a lot of doctors that go straight towards a really low carb diet. And yes, carbs definitely affect insulin resistance. And yes, in polycystic ovary syndrome, in some patients, in the majority of polycystic ovary syndrome patients, we want insulin to come down. Now, that's not everybody. That's not across the board. But in some patients, they do have insulin resistance, which is contributing, and we want that to come down. But low carb diets are really, really, really hard. They're hard. And mood-wise, challenging for patients. And so I think food pairing is important and macros are important, right? So making sure that you never sit down to a meal that is just a giant plate of carbohydrates and doing a little bit of carbohydrates mixed with fat and protein, you're going to be satiated and your blood sugar is not going to spike quite so much. So your insulin's not going to spike quite so much. And you can really manage it just by doing those things. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be a one size fits all super extreme, which is where I think that patients struggle sometimes with doctors is that, well, this is the blanket, this is the extreme, go for it. Yeah. And so I love that. I think that's so important.
Yeah. I've definitely experimented, I have gone through all of the fad diets and like, where do I want to start here? I've gone through all of the fad diets, obviously. as a high school kid, basically right out of high school, showing all of these symptoms and gaining all of this weight. Like, I did all of the things. I was a cardio bunny. I went running every day, even though I freaking hated it. I was passionate. And as keto has kind of like, and low carb has really gained popularity, kind of across the board, but definitely within the PCOS community, I have tried keto. I've done low carb. And really what I found was most difficult is that my workouts sucked.
Yes,
It was like,
they're terrible on low carb.
Awful.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this is just it's not sustainable for people. So I work on a very, very simplistic way of managing macros. It's very, very simplistic because, like I said, I feel like most of my clients, when we start working together, are really kind of in this cyclical diet culture way of thinking. And they're really struggling with a lot of mental and emotional feelings about their body and their weight and, their self-worth. And I want to help them break down those kind of disordered eating thoughts about, what diet culture sells us and what those extremes are. So it's a big chunk of like breaking it all down and really getting to the root of all of those thoughts and feelings.
It is, and getting a relationship with food that is a healthy relationship with food. Because even on macros, which I'm a huge advocate of macros. They've changed my life. There's still those thought patterns that come in, right, on how much you are supposed to eat, especially as a female, or what you should be eating as a female, right? So like as a female, you should be eating this salad because that's what culture says that you should be eating, right? Now, I'm not advocating for going and eating a cheeseburger and French fries every day at all. It's about balance, and it's about creating a healthy relationship with food where you can feel satisfied and still feel like you're able to maintain and move forward in your journey, which I think is really, really important.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I do think that a lot of women who struggle with their weight, right, they do come in and they've done the over-exercising, they've done the under-eating, they've done every single fad diet. It's interesting, and I think it's about finding the body. Like for me, I did keto and I was terrible on keto. First of all, my weight went up like crazy because I don't do well on high fat. And then second of all, I just was cranky. I was annoyed and cranky and mad all the time. And so needless to say, my fiance was like, don't do that again. That was nobody wants that. Thank you. And so I think it's about finding what works for you. And I love that approach of just kind of guiding people through it because there isn't a one size fits all. So when you're coaching patients, what are the struggles that you're seeing the most, and what advice would you give to women going through those struggles?
The struggles that I feel like I see the most in clients are very similar to the ones that I struggled with. So when we think about kind of the main areas of lifestyle change that I focus on, first being nutrition, as I said, we kind of work through those kind of like lingering beliefs about food and their body, and how that kind of all works within their lifestyle without like it taking over their whole life. We all know like people, especially, like fitness professionals and stuff who are like obsessed with like meal planning and things like that. And it seems like that's all that they do with their life. And that's not sustainable for a real person, for an average person who, is doing things outside of training people. So we focus a lot on that. They are really struggling with figuring out what works for them, and really struggling with managing expectations and reality. That is a really big one. Not understanding that, like these 3-month result crash diets that they see is not like what you're going to get when you work with a coach and somebody who's really trying to help you heal your body and your metabolism. So understanding that those results and those expectations, are different than what, maybe diet culture has sold them. when we think about exercise, a lot of the issues that my clients come to me with and a lot of things that they struggle with are things like overthinking exercise, thinking, well, I've got to eat this or take this before, I've got to do this, take this after, I've got to work like these muscle groups together and I don't know how to do that. I don't know how the machines work. Just like the general overwhelm of like the anxious overthinker kind of comes out. So I work with a lot of people like that because that was me. And that was a lot of the excuse that I used to tell myself. Oh, I don't know how this works. Oh, I can't afford the supplements for before and after. I don't know what type of muscle groups to work together. So I can't go to the gym.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, right. So we work with that a lot. The stress management piece is really, really huge. I think a lot of people feel like there's not enough real life applicable stress relief advice or stress management advice. It feels very abstract, when you're like, oh, just relax, like take a bath or meditate, or, I look at people, I'm like, that's not going to work. It might work a little bit, like, yeah, taking a bath can be relaxing, but is that going to actually help you manage like a low grade chronic stressor in your life that you can't get rid of right now?
Yep.
No. So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, and it's funny because I do think that I agree with you. There is this blanket recommendation on, for example, meditation. And the research on meditation is fantastic. And when you read about the majority of successful people, they do meditate and they have like kind of a morning routine. Well, some people can't fit that into their morning routine. Like their puzzle does not fit meditation in. And some people just can't meditate. Like it actually gives them more stress and anxiety sitting there thinking, well, why am I not able to do this like other people can do this than just picking something else. I think that's really important. Not everybody manages stress the exact same way. And as long as you pick a healthy coping mechanism, like
exactly. And that's part of, what we help people decipher. Meditation is amazing. I meditate myself, but it was always something that I thought was kind of a bunch of BS. For a long time I did, because I was that person. I sat down, tried to meditate, and it just didn't make sense to me. It did make me more anxious. I felt like I was being unproductive during that time, which really stressed me out. But meditation is a practice. And again, it goes back to managing expectations versus reality. It's a practice. You have to build it. It takes a while for you to be able to sit down, quiet your mind, be able to meditate, and to see the benefits of it. But it's amazing if you can sit down and do it.
Absolutely. And I think some of that's giving yourself grace, because when you hear things like I'm being unproductive at this point, that's actually like a very negative thought, but that's what a lot of people think. That's what I thought when I tried to meditate. Well, I could be spending this 15 minutes doing something better. Right. And I think it's about partly giving yourself grace, which I think going through a PCOS journey is really important because it has ups and downs. And that's one of the things is I always tell my patients when we're treating them, we'll take 4 steps forward. Like we're hitting our cycles every single month. Symptoms are better. Things are good. And then all of a sudden one stressor will hit. And 3 months later, we still haven't been able to get the cycle back. It is ups and downs. And it's not a linear journey at all. And so I think it's important for women to know that, because it can be so frustrating. It's one of the more frustrating things, I think.
Oh, absolutely. I still, when I have big stressors in my life, my cycle is the first thing to respond to it, and it goes wonky. And what is so frustrating about that is that you get stressed about whether the stress is going to affect your cycle. Like you're stressed that you're stressed because the stress is affecting your cycle. It's, it's a cycle in itself. But it won't always be like that in terms of, 100-day cycle length, but that's always going to be part of life, is managing your stress. And I think, like I said, I think it feels really abstract for a lot of people. And it's, stress is, a killer of humans. It's, it's a big one.
Yeah. And I mean, it affects your hormones. There's something called the pregnenolone steal, which I've talked about a lot on other episodes and other podcasts, where your body will literally steal your pregnenolone, which is your building block for your hormones. It's kind of the first thing that gets converted into progesterone or into DHEA and into testosterone, and it converts it to cortisol instead, because the body's really smart. and it goes, okay, she's stressed. She doesn't need to be pregnant right now. And so no progesterone needed, right? Doesn't need libido, no testosterone needed. And it just
Mhm.
right over there. And so I think that for some women, I think it's just kind of understanding, not in like a medical way, the cycle, but kind of starting to see how these things affect, because the minute you know how it affects it, then you can kind of put it into your own hands to be able to try and manage life, because that's really what it is. It's managing life. You can't,
Exactly.
life doesn't go the way we want it to, that's for sure. Welcome to 2020. Life does not go the way we want it to. And so, yeah, I think that's really important. Any other major struggles that you're seeing with your women, or any other advice that you have for them?
Hmm. Um, I wish that I could just like sum up like one really good piece of advice, but I really feel like there's so much to it that
Mhm.
it's difficult for me to just like give one piece of really like amazing advice. But I think what I would say is just to remember that it's possible. People are doing it every day. You know, when I started this journey, I had a 570-day length cycle. I had several rounds of Provera, but I did not ovulate until 570 days later. But after that, my cycles have been pretty dang regular, and that is a major win. So it happens, and I think you have to remember that you're playing a very long game.
That's awesome.
And just
I think that's really important, and I think it's day by day. So for women, it sounds like, I think that a really great place for women to start, and both of us would agree with this, is with strength training. So not necessarily with blanket adding in exercise, although exercise is fantastic. Subbing some of the cardio that women are doing for actually lifting weights. And in my practice, a really good way to start that is to do some resistance bands training. You can buy resistance bands. They're so inexpensive. You can find workouts online that you can do at your home. And resistance bands, actually, for being such a flimsy little tiny piece of stretchy,
right,
like
whatever it is.
rubber, they are hard work. So doing resistance bands, I would think, is a great place for women to start. And then recognizing that if things like keto or certain diets aren't working for you, there are ways to modify or create something that brings a little bit more balance to your life that still will allow you to move forward in your health and in your journey, and isn't sabotaging your kind of metabolic response, right? Is encouraging your metabolic response.
Yeah.
So awesome. Erin, how can people get in touch with you if they need more information?
Yeah, so my absolute favorite platform is Instagram. You can find me on Instagram at PCOS Health Coaching. I also have a website, PCOSHealthCoaching.com, where all my contact methods are. So email or Instagram is probably the best way. I also have a free Facebook group for PCOS women. It's called the PCOS Girl Gang. I actually have free learning units set up in there, where I go over all of these kind of big lifestyle categories and break them down. I have additional resources, articles from different people, studies, so that people can kind of go through, learn at their own pace, make change as it feels comfy for them. So that's probably the best way. In the PCOS Girl Gang, you're on Instagram.
Awesome. So we are going to link the ways to get in touch with Erin down below in the show notes. Thank you so much again, Erin, for coming on. And then for our viewers, if you are liking the content that we're putting out, or you have somebody that you think this content could help, please feel free to share it with them. Sharing with them helps us get the word out there about our channel. And then, as always, subscribe and hit the notification bell. And go and check out Erin's resources, because if you are struggling with PCOS, the first step is just learning. And she brings, especially in her Facebook group, a ton of value, so that the research is there and you can start to kind of digest it at your own pace. And I think that's really, really important. Thanks again, Erin, for coming on.